Welcome to the Cardinal News of Virginia, a podcast from Cardinal News. We are a nonprofit news outlet covering Southwest and Southside Virginia at cardinalnews.org. The Cardinal podcast is sponsored by 5 Points Creative, a full-service, award-winning marketing firm serving clients all over the U.S. from their headquarters in Roanoke, Virginia. I'm Dutchie Jessee, and today I'm speaking with Cardinal News education reporter Lisa Rowan and our executive editor, Jeff Schwaner. Welcome to both of you.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right, welcome. And we're talking today about a project that Cardinal News has embarked on. We're calling it the State of Surveillance Project. Jeff, what is it?
So first I want to know if I'm the first person to drink from a Cardinal News mug on the podcast.
I think you are. We've had it as just a prop before, but it's actually being utilized.
There's actual coffee in this mug.
Yeah,
You are not the first person to drink from the mug. I will say, sorry to jump on your efforts here to promote, but I was the first.
All right, well, now that that's settled, we can move on to our topic.
Here.
The State of Surveillance Project. Jeff, what is that?
So we really wanted to start to set out to quantify just how much public-facing surveillance there is by law enforcement in the Southwest and Southside in our audience, and our research took us, to an even wider view than that. And along the way, we also wanted to answer other questions that come out about this kind of public surveillance. Is it FOIAble? Can you get information like you can from law enforcement agencies for other non-investigative things? What uses is it being put to? How much does it cost? And is it effective in any way? And then there are the larger questions that have been brought up of invasion of privacy, and does this surveillance lead to the literal surveillance state?
I want to know where the idea came from. You started by saying we wanted to find out how many Where did this idea come from? Either one of you. Take that.
Dean Paul Stevens, another one of our reporters, was publishing a story about the Martinsville police it was dozens of gunshot detecting devices. And the company that makes them was Flock. And so I asked Dean about that story, and he was like, oh yeah, I've written about this before when Martinsville put in a bunch of surveillance cameras. And I'm like, really? I'd never heard of this type of public surveillance before, besides like the cameras at stoplights that for a while were trying to auto ticket you, for running a stoplight. So I was really interested, and the more I found out, I started Googling Flock, and the first thing I saw was a third-party company that regularly tracks how well these types of cameras work was constantly being rebuffed by Flock. Flock wasn't letting them use their cameras to test how well they worked, and so there was already a little bit of controversy around the company. And so I was thinking, like, dozens of cameras in this one, city of like 14,000. Well, how many are, how many there are in Roanoke? How many are there in these counties along Route 81 and Route 29? And how often are we being photographed in public without our knowledge?
I want to get to that before we move on and specify exactly the technology we're talking about, because you alluded to the red light cameras, the cameras that have been around for a long time now, taking a photo of the license plate as it crosses the intersection, for example. What are we talking about exactly in this project? Is it only the Flock cameras? Be specific, if you will.
Well, it is a lot of things, and that's part of it, was deciding what we were going to look at in terms of surveillance technology. So we're not looking at CCTV that is within a courthouse or anything like that. We're looking at things that are out on the street that you might pass in the course of your daily life. The thing that we've seen most often is license plate readers. These are not necessarily ones that monitor running stoplights or going through toll booths, but they might be near an intersection or along a busy road, just recording license plates as you go go by, as well as information about the cars that go by, what they look like. Another thing that Jeff had brought up was gunshot detectors. These are listening devices that are posted in a location to listen for that distinct sound of a gunshot to determine whether there might be violence in an area. And there also might be some facial recognition technology that places are using to really, like, as you're walking down the street, could potentially identify you. And in theory, all these things are being used to prevent and solve crimes. But it raises questions about what else could that data be used for, and how much am I really being watched when I'm going about my daily life?
So a gunshot detector, I've never heard of that before now. What is it? What does it look like? Can we see it? Won't you point it out to us? What is that?
What does it look like, Jeff? Do you know?
It's those gunshot detectors. The one couple photos I've seen of them, they sometimes they include cameras as well, and they usually have a solar panel connected to them. In the photos that I've seen, and they are configured to detect sounds within a certain range. In North Carolina, there was a ton of adoption of gunshot detectors, and now there is like a big movement away from those detectors because it turned into a case of the tail wagging the dog, where like the gunshot detectors were telling local police like there's been a gunshot in this area. Their procedure was to go out and look for signs that a gun had been fired, so looking for shells, and this is pulling them away from doing their other business, walking around looking for shells or signs of a gunshot when there's nobody in the area that by the time they get there. And that I think the percentage was somewhere under 10% or 15% of the time that they responded that there was any proof of that there had been a gunshot in that area. So that's not as prevalent as far as we can tell in this area as much as LPRs, license plate readers. And the real question is, as Lisa put, like, how often are you being filmed and photographed? And kind of the big cultural change is that usually a police agency needs to go and get a court order. They need to get approval to like start filming somebody, to start following them around, start surveilling them, record their phone conversations, whatever the case may be. Now this is just flat out 24/7 public surveillance of a space, not of a person. So it's a street corner, it is an intersection, it is a place where people are coming off one of the highways into a town or leaving that town. And so it's non-investigative in nature, but it can be used. And an officer can get onto one of these systems, and Flock is not the only system. I think Motorola has a system like it, and there are several others that are in use in the Southwest and the Southside. But an officer can get on and do a search for a license plate, for instance, and they can track like where that person who drives that car, or at least where that vehicle has been over time.
How did you, Cardinal has a very large footprint geographically, so Southwest and Southside Virginia, how did you collectively as a newsroom decide how to get the data, how much data to get, and start going about collecting data? Let's talk about the number of localities here. Lisa's eyes are going to light up because we're going to get into spreadsheets. But tell me what you looked, how many localities did you look at, and then what did you find?
So I just want to preface this, and then I'll hand it over to Lisa. There's the before Lisa and the after Lisa kind of watermark here. So the first thing that we did is Dwayne Yancey, our founding editor, and I just started going over like all the counties, and we figured like, okay, it's not going to be the small police departments, it's going to be these larger counties who can afford to do this, right? So that's like 50 some odd counties in our area, and then we started looking just outside that county. To the next one over and saying, okay, well, should we include those two? And then I grabbed the entire staff, and we do a thing that we call swarming, where we will all, swarm like bees to a, or ants,
or
however you
like
consider,
cardinals,
yes, or cardinals. We'll all swarm to a news event, or we'll all swarm to a topic. So for about 4 hours, we took, and this is where Lisa started to come in, she created a spreadsheet of all of those counties. It was something like 61 altogether with the counties and some city police departments. And every reporter at Cardinal contacted at least 8 law enforcement agencies, found the PIO, found the sheriff or the chief of police, found the FOIA officer.
And we just
asked
as a
them
reminder,
direct questions on the phone. Just called them up, asked them direct questions as to whether they had public-facing surveillance tech.
and FOIA is Freedom of Information Act, just for people
Yes,
who might not know
Freedom
that
of
term.
Information Act. And so often the PIO, the Public Information Officer, would be like, yeah, or no, I don't think so. And so would get some basic information down, and then they would send a FOIA email saying, we want to know, we want to see all the contracts that you have, and find out what type of tech you have. And so everybody sent out, over that 4-hour period, we sent out well over 50 FOIA requests and contacted them on the phone directly, so people, in these agencies would know it was coming. Then we found out there were more.
And that process, Jeff is talking about us all working together for 4 hours, but getting all that information back and the communication, we were also doing this all over the holiday break. We started this in mid-December, and it took us about a month to get all the information back from the places that we had contacted. So we were working with that data as it came through to see what these law enforcement agencies had and what vendors they were working with, what were the costs, and then we just kept finding out about more and more places. Part of that is because we were able to access some data from Flock, one of the vendors that offers these types of surveillance tools to law enforcement agencies. And they have these web pages that a locality can use to say, here's what we use here, how many cameras we have, and how many other places we share our data with. Not a lot of places that are Flock customers take advantage of these pages, but we found enough to be able to piece together a list of all the places in Virginia that were using this technology in some way. So even though we were focusing our research on Southwest and Southside Virginia, this is wide-ranging, and I could be someone who lives in Virginia Beach but drove over to Roanoke, and I could have my car spotted sort of along that whole trip and along the whole way back. So it really doesn't matter where you live in this state. You are impacted by this. So we were piecing together information from contacting law enforcement agencies ourselves, using the data that Flock had available that was public-facing.
So let's be clear that Flock provided us no data. But
Correct.
while we were tooling around one night, and Lisa knows there were many nights where I was like, hey, Lisa, look what I found,
Well
tooling
past
around.
working hours.
And while we were doing this one night, I found a Flock transparency page. And this is an optional page that an agency that participates in the Flock system can have to show their citizens in their community how many cameras they have. They have a bunch of different options. One of those options is the number of times they've performed a search over the last 30 days. One of those options is the number of times that, like an Amber Alert or some alert from another agency was pinged in their area. And one of the things is the other law enforcement agencies that allow, that they are allowing to check out their data. So I found, what was the name of that community?
Woodstock, Virginia.
Woodstock, yep. Not the music festival Woodstock, but the Woodstock. And I saw Boone's Mill, which we had not FOIA'd for any information. I was like, Boone's Mill, that's the place Tad went for the election that has like one police officer. And so I had Tad contact the agency there, and they're like, yeah, we have 3 cameras. We only have one of them up right now, but we have 3 cameras. So they have 1.5 law enforcement officers and 3 cameras. Then we realized, okay, this is much bigger than just the big agencies. And as we started to get data back, we started to get contracts back, and we started seeing and getting emails back, and we started seeing that a lot of the financing for these cameras was provided by a state program called HEAT, which is Help Eliminate Auto Theft. And it started way back in the 90s, where they take a little bit of money from the revenue of auto insurance receipts every year, and the insurance companies pay this to the state, and the state supposedly uses this to pay tipsters off to find car thieves. But what it has developed into is a pretty quiet way of financing surveillance tech. And it didn't really kick in until I think it was 2022.
Yes,
Lisa,
that's right.
when HEAT started giving out grants of kind of standard size grants of like $12,500, but sometimes the grants are $15,000, sometimes they're $19,000, sometimes they could be more, sometimes they're $10,000, and you see the price of the flock cameras going up a little bit every year. But then we started realizing, like, okay, this is how Boone's Mill can have 3 flock cameras and be part of this massive system. It's because they're not paying a dime for it. The folks at HEAT let us know that, like, it's an annual thing. You have to reapply and reapply and reapply, but their funding just goes up every year because the amount of money coming from the insurance companies into this fund just goes up every year. So pretty quiet measure to create a system where the government is paying for for all of these cameras to be put up.
Some might say, well, what's the big deal? You're out in a public setting, and especially for a small town that doesn't have as much staff as maybe it could use, or for whatever reason, they're short-staffed or whatever. Why not use technology as our friend? It's efficient. What is the big deal? If you're not doing anything wrong, why do you care? So what have you heard?
So, I'll defer to Lisa first, and then I'll throw in my stuff since, we've got a whole story coming up that's based on this.
Now, we have found that there are a lot of places, especially those smaller law enforcement agencies, where they've been able to use this technology to solve crimes. It gives them extra eyes where they couldn't physically have a person. It helps them collect evidence for a case in going after someone who they believe has committed a crime. So it definitely has helpful outcomes in a lot of places. The big question around privacy is, I'll use like me as a private person as example. Me as a private person, I didn't sign up to be watched everywhere I go, right? And it's not clear in today's world where that right ends and begins of my privacy. It's there are places where we expect not to have privacy. If we're in a courthouse, if we're at the DMV, there are places that it's established that there are cameras, we will be monitored, and there are safety measures in place. But it's not clear how that right on law enforcement side or my side extends to if I'm walking down the street or if I'm driving my car through a neighborhood. So while there may be some really helpful uses of this, it's not entirely clear how the data that's collected is used and how easy it is for the average person to get. So for instance, if I had a stalker, could they find me by asking the police to search for my license plate to see my whereabouts and to see my routes to and from work? That's something we're working on in some of our later reporting on this. But that's one of the big questions is, people didn't explicitly sign up and acknowledge that they're going to be watched when they're out and about living their lives. So where's the line between an investigation and just monitoring the public?
Yeah. Some would say, well, you're walking around with a smartphone. You're walking around where there's security cameras at every establishment just about. I'm just playing devil's advocate here because you're going to hear that argument. I want to ask you, did you get good cooperation? I mean, you used the Freedom of Information Act to get some information, but when you had to make phone calls or like speak personally with someone, I could hear, maybe I could be totally wrong, but some people go, why are you asking us about this? Was it hard to get information? Was there a little sensitivity there?
Dutchie, I can take this one.
Okay.
I had a conversation with someone at a sheriff's office the day that we started making these calls. And I told him what I was looking for and what I was asking about. And he said, well, I don't want that information out in the public. I don't want criminals to know what tools we're using and how we're using them. And I was sort of taken aback because my reaction as a reporter was, well, sir, you're a local government agency, so this is all public anyway. Like, I understand you not wanting criminals to know, but like legally, your government has to share this information. So I think there was some hesitancy from a lot of law enforcement agencies to share this information. There was also some confusion about what law enforcement agencies had. Where were their contracts? What were the devices? And this is a newer popular technology. This has come up in the last several years, like we're talking the last 5 years, that this has gotten more popular. And it's something that has come up in statewide conversation as well in terms of tracking what law enforcement agencies are using. This is another part of the data that we added into our like meshing of putting things together and piecing this puzzle together. Is the Virginia General Assembly passed a law last session in 2024 that said that every year law enforcement agencies have to report to the state what surveillance technology they're using. They did this for the first time in the fall, and it was a really simple survey that got sent out. And we accessed those survey results through the Freedom of Information Act. Not every law enforcement agency responded to that survey that's required by law. I think the response rate was about 80%. And because it's the first year for that survey, there was some confusion about the different things that were asked on the survey and what they do. And some of the information might have been wrong.
Confusion.
There was a lot of confusion, and we'll talk about it if we have time, because there's a little interesting tidbit.
We found over a dozen police agencies in our area that told the state they did not have license plate reading technology, but which sent contracts to us.
Okay.
So that tells you that, like, even quantifying usage is difficult, because we had our data, and I can't tell you how many times Lisa and I were talking late at night, and I was looking at all this poster board on my wall, being like, okay, is it 81? Is it 74? And Lisa's looking at her spreadsheet.
Count it again.
And then when we saw the state report, we're like, wow, this place said it doesn't have LPR tech. And I'd be scurrying back and finding the contract documents and being like, well, heck yeah, they do. One thing I want to go back to quickly, not to change the subject, but just to kind of clarify, is that yes, we are putting together a story about crimes that have been solved, or where the apprehension, at least, of a person of interest has resulting in charges has happened as a result of FLOC, not FLOC being the only thing, but LPR readers, and the vast majority of those incidents are crimes from another jurisdiction or another state. So you're in Martinsville and you get, you're in Franklin County and you get a ping that there is a vehicle that belongs to a person wanted for kidnapping is in your area, and so you're able to go like check the flock data and see where they pinged your cameras, and then see if you can go find them. And in one case that happened, it was a domestic dispute. Father took his kids out of Pennsylvania, I believe it was, and was driving his way down, through Virginia to another state, and the cameras caught him. In another case, a murder suspect in Virginia, which is, we're talking about something more serious. This is a case in Virginia where there was a murder suspect, and he allegedly stole the car of the person he allegedly killed, and then that plate pinged in North Carolina, and there was an arrest made in North Carolina. But by and large, it's not solving local crime, and we have yet to see any indication that it is having any impact on car theft, which is, what the HEAT money is supposed to be doing, is helping to eliminate automobile, theft. So, so there's that to consider. I think on a larger scale, the question of privacy includes, the whole way that we have structured this is not around incident-specific surveillance, which is you've got a guy, you've got a suspected mobster, and you're going to follow him around. You're going to take pictures every place he goes, et cetera, et cetera. But it is just public-facing technology, and the gray area that creates is exactly the type of area where, if it's not investigative data, then under general FOIA law, we should be able to access it. And so there's another story coming out where I took a drive around Cardinal country. So I'm based in Stanton right now. I went down 81, I drove through Roanoke a little bit. I went down, this is all in a day. I went down to Martinsville, I drove around. I went over to Danville, I drove around. I went up to Lynchburg, I drove around, and then I went home. And I've FOIA'd over 18 agencies because there's that many that are just, not even kind of getting outside the main roads, but just in the main roads, 18 plus agencies that are using license plate reader tech. Does that mean that I ran through all of them? Probably not, because some places just have 3 cameras, some have 20 cameras. But it'll give us an illustration of like how that works. But in one case, I had a law enforcement officer call me back and say, I just want to make sure this was your vehicle, because I stated in my request, like, this is my vehicle, I just want to see how many cameras I was caught on. I want to see if your cameras, captured any images of my car. And he called me back, and, I love this guy. He was like, I just want to make sure you're not, like, stalking your ex-wife. And I was like, I am so glad you said that, because that is the danger of using non-incident specific, collecting non-investigative data. Well, the Freedom of Information Act doesn't have any caveats for non-investigative data that might become investigative at some point. And so I think someday there's going to be some guy who's trying to stalk his wife, and might be his ex-wife, and might be willing to go to court about it. And unless there's some legislation that addresses that, this data is, from what I can tell, technically public and non-investigative in nature. So that's like kind of why we chose to go for public-facing surveillance tech, as opposed to the type of tech that's in your vehicle that shows whether the cop is pushing you around when they take you out of your vehicle, for a stop.
Well, we will, there are more installments to come for this whole project. It's going to be going on for a while. So I'm going to ask some of those questions in future podcasts, because I think we're going to have a lot of interesting results, including reaction to this work and all that good stuff. So for now, thank you, Lisa and Jeff, for sharing what you've done so far on this project. I always like to wrap up the podcast by letting people know how they can reach each guest in case they have feedback for you, or a question, or a news tip, or anything. Lisa, what's your email?
Yeah, I'm at lisa@cardinalnews.org.
Jeff?
And I'm Jeffrey, Jeffrey. That name has just never escaped me since I was born. Jeffrey@cardinalnews.org.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us, and I want to also thank our sponsor, 5 Points Creative, also Sherry Quinley for her excellent technical support, and Zach Shelton as well from Cardinal News. Thanks to everyone for listening to the Cardinal News of Virginia. I'm Dutchie Jessee for Cardinal News.